you want to be very careful about creating logos on Canva.
Yeah.
Canva owns their elements. So when you use a logo, when you create a logo on Canva, you can't own it. And that's the bottom line. So you don't own it. Canva owns it.
Welcome to Manage Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. We are on episode 3 of our 4-part legal series with Lauren, and we are so excited to have her here. She is not just a trademark attorney, she's a brand protector, a storyteller, and an advocate for female founders who want to lock in their legacy. As a founder of Storylock Legal, Lauren helps entrepreneurs safeguard the brands they've worked so hard to build, ensuring their names, logos, and creative assets are truly theirs. Lauren, on this episode, we're going to lean into sort of creative entrepreneurs, podcasters, course creators, and discuss the reality of IP theft in the digital age. Selfishly, let's start with podcasts. How do you protect your show name and your audio content when you have a podcast you're just starting out, or maybe you've taken off and you've gotten lots of downloads, lots of listeners? What do you need to do?
Your podcast is a business and it is a name that can be protected. So same thing with any trademark. You want to make sure that the name you are using for your podcast is clear to use through a comprehensive trademark search. And then you want to file your application. That's a given for your podcast. And then with regard to your show notes and your recordings, again, those are subject to copyright protection. As I said in an earlier episode, the second those assets are created, they are protected via copyright. However, if you want to make sure that nobody steals them, nobody tries to pass them off as their own, then you want to file your copyright registrations. Now, most people probably aren't going to copyright every single podcast episode. But if you have a few, that went viral or whatever it may be, you might want to protect them. But you also need to make sure that you have good contracts in place with your guests so that things are being used in the manner in which you have set forth. That's how I would protect them. But really definitely protects the name. And then again, you can consider, what assets are important, what core materials to your podcast to protect as well.
All right, perfect. That's helpful. And that's also why one of the reasons that we immediately trademarked the name. We were getting a lot of comments about how much people love the name. And we thought, okay, as we get more traction, we really need to make sure that this name is ours and doesn't necessarily belong to anyone else.
Right.
Something recently came up on a client call where she actually has changed her name. She went to file for her LLC and she decided that her current name didn't really fit and she wanted to change it. And when she went to adjust it, she said, now I need to adjust my logo. But I had someone make this logo for me. Can I just change the name on the logo? Do I actually own this logo? Like, am I allowed to make changes to it? So let's talk through that.
Oh, goodness. So many challenges
Sticky
here.
situation.
Yes. Everybody needs to make sure that if you have a graphic designer or somebody else that creates your logo or any of your, your branding, but particularly your logo, you want to make sure that in the agreement that you signed with them, that they have turned the IP over to you as the owner. So you want to be sure that, you, Katrina, own the rights in and to the Managed Chaos podcast name and logo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody else created it for you, then technically you don't own it. So that is number one. Number two, you want to be very careful about creating logos on Canva. Canva owns their elements. So when you use a logo, when you create a logo on Canva, you can't own it. And that's the bottom line. So you don't own it. Canva owns it. So be very careful about that. Finally, and this goes with, logo creation, with everything, read your contracts. Do not ever sign a contract that you haven't read. And not just read, but actually understand. If you don't understand particular clauses in a contract that you're signing, you need to ask somebody for help because Contracts are important. And when you sign, you're bound. So, especially when it comes to things like your IP and your assets, you want to make sure that, you own them, you understand how they can be used and stuff of that nature.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I know so many founders who are like, this is probably just a standard contract. DocuSign.
Right. And then the other thing that I see is people that put together their own contracts, which I get. If you're a service provider, you've seen a lot of contracts, you think you can pull, Frankenstein it, right? You can pull something from here, you pull something from there. But then when they come to me because they're like, I need some help, like, can you just check with my contract? And I'm reading it through and I'm like, these clauses compete. This is talking about, governing law in Massachusetts, but this is saying arbitration is in California. Like, they don't make sense. And so it's really, really important that you are creating a contract that works in your favor, that you understand, and that actually protects you because it's such an easy place to slip and you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to slip. Like the contract is the foundation of your business.
Yes. So let's talk about terms of use. So when you're building your website, and let's say you're doing it on your own, why do you need a privacy policy in terms of use? It's just me on Squarespace, putting, slapping something together for the website. Why do we need all that, fancy stuff for the big websites?
Yes. Okay. So, what many people don't know is that having a privacy policy on your website is actually a legal requirement. You can be fined if you don't have one. The purpose of the privacy policy is to protect the consumer so that anybody coming to your website knows how their information is being used and or stored. So, again, somebody that's just offering, or just explaining their services on their website versus somebody who's actually selling products or collecting information via a form, those are all going to have very different privacy policies, but each one is important because the customer is entitled to know what you're doing with their information, basically. So, whether it's just your name and email address, or whether it's payment information, or whether it's age and salary information, whatever it may be. We fill out forms all the time.
Yep.
That is to protect the consumer so they know exactly how their information is being protected. So that's the legal requirement. Now, on the other hand, whereas the privacy policy protects the consumer, the terms and conditions or the terms of use protects the business. That is going to tell your customers, we don't have a return policy, no returns and no chargebacks. Claims are limited to XYZ. The law in the state of Florida will govern this contract in case there's an issue. So that's where you protect yourself. That's where you have your disclaimers if you need them, and stuff of that nature. So both documents are very important. Lawyers can help with all of them, obviously. Certain businesses have a lot more exposure. So if you are a business that works with children, you really want to go to an expert attorney who is going to know exactly what's required because there are different laws relating to websites that, are targeting children with their services or their products. So again, if you are a food product, different terms and conditions than if you're just a business consultant. So all of those things matter, and it's important to make sure that you're getting, yourself the most protection that you can get through that contract. So then privacy policy protects the consumer, terms and conditions protect the business.
Perfect. I do want to go take one step back just to something you had mentioned about Canva, because I think a lot of people don't know that aspect of it. So if you're creating something in Canva, a logo, something that you intend to eventually potentially trademark, you actually cannot because Canva owns it, not you. Can you just go a little bit more into that? What's the nuance of that?
So when you go into Canva and you're selecting from like all of their icon, like they have things, and I'm not a graphic designer, so
It's like clip art. From the
Yeah,
90s? Yeah.
butchering this language. But it's one thing if someone is like hand drawing a logo or hand creating it on Photoshop or whatever. But on Canva, when it's more of like a drag and drop and you're kind of like making something bigger or whatever, you didn't create that. You're simply using their art.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, you're not creating it, so you can't technically own it. And what's interesting now is that even with copyright in this world of AI, where, there is question as to what is actually human created and what is actually machine created, the laws are evolving every day. And so if you have questions about, I wrote this awesome, article or whatever it is, or this awesome novel, but AI really helped me with it. But I gave AI these detailed prompts, right?
Mm-hmm.
To create said novel or said piece of art or said workbook. Well, then there's a question of what part can you protect as an owner and a creator, and what part has been machine created through AI. And again, evolving all the time. People can use AI for ideation, to kind of get some ideas, but always make sure the writing in the end is your own. And if you have questions, look, again, I love AI, but I am not an expert in AI as it comes to the law because it is changing so fast and you really have to constantly keep up. But we have other friends in the IP world who specialize in that. Whereas I specialize in trademarks, that's my jam. Other people specialize in AI and are really keeping abreast of the laws and the legal landscape because it's like the wild, wild west right now.
So let's say as a founder, you've done everything you were supposed to do. You filed everything you were supposed to file. You got your letters from the patent office. You celebrated. But then you see that someone is actually either stealing your content, infringing on your trademark. How do you take strategic action versus just sheer panic?
Yes. Always great to consult with an attorney. You want to be sure before you send any kind of cease and desist letter that you've done your due diligence, that this person actually started after you, that you have the rights to the mark in that zone, right? If you're using the name Managed Chaos in connection with a podcast and somebody else is using it for like teachers pay teachers,
Yep.
digital downloads, well, that's not necessarily going to conflict, right? You're working in two different areas. So all of these things are important. And then once you do your due diligence, you can send a cease and desist letter through an attorney. I just sent one the other day because a client of mine was like, this person is on my mailing list. They read my emails. They're using the same name. And granted, it was not the exact same space, but it was related enough and close enough that, we were able to send a cease and desist letter and they folded immediately because they were also using the R symbol saying that their mark was registered federally and it was not, which is also, a problem. So definitely you need to be thoughtful. You need to be intentional. And most important, you can't just like be impulsive and send something.
Yeah. So don't fire off that message at 11 o'clock at night when you first see it.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you for joining this episode of Managed Chaos Podcast. As a note, this podcast is for information purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you do need legal advice, you can find out how to contact Lauren in the show notes. And we will see you on the next episode of Managed Chaos Podcast.
Outsourcing your US tech talent shouldn't be hard. With Pobble.io, we deliver high-quality teams on demand and provide huge cost savings to your business. Try it now at Pobble.io. Mention the amazing guys at Managed Chaos when you email us and get a free market data report. Email contact@Pobble.io.